Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And hi all. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you bivariate analysis, where we are going to look at correlation and simple linear regression. Bivariate analysis involve two variables, and sometimes these two variables are found to be related to one another. So correlation and regression analysis are used to describe the relationship between these two numerical variables. So in this video, we are going to discuss correlation and regression analysis for quantitative variable only, where one of them is dependent variable and another one is independent variable. Independent variable X, change or controlled by the researcher, where it can occur naturally or chosen freely, always on the x-axis. Independent variable also is a variable that might have a causal effect on the dependent variable. So independent variable yang akan memberi kesan kepada your dependent variable. Dependent variable Y is a variable whose value depends or change upon independent variable. It's a variable that we are trying to forecast. So here we have two variables, X and Y. Y depends on X. Y is your dependent variable and X is your independent variable. So let's look at a few examples. We have the level of nicotine in human bodies is related to the number of cigarettes smoked. So logically, the level of nicotine will depend on how many cigarettes you smoke. Nicotine depends on. So nicotine is your dependent variable Y. Dependent variable Y. And the number of cigarettes smoked per day will be your independent variable X. Again, level of nicotine depends on the number of cigarettes smoked. So, level nikotin dalam badan logically bergantung kepada berapa banyak bilangan cigarette yang you smoke per day. Another example is hours of revision done and your statistics results. Again, logically, hours of revision and statistics result. So, your statistics result will depend on the hours of revision done. So, statistics result depends on dependent. Markah statistics ataupun result statistics awak bergantung kepada number of hours you buat revision. So this is a few example. We are going to look at a few more later on. So kita akan tengok scatter diagram. So scatter diagram is a graphical representation to investigate the relationship between the dependent and independent variable. So actually, scatter diagram is the easiest way for you to see the relationship between the two variables. In a scatter diagram, the independent variable is plotted along the horizontal x-axis. Independent variable is your x. and the dependent variable is plotted along the vertical y-axis. Dependent variable is y. So, independent variable x, plot dekat x. Dependent variable y, plot dekat y. So, information available in a scatter diagram. So, apa yang you boleh dapatkan selepas you draw a scatter plot? So, the first one is you can identify the type of the relationship. If you plot a scatter diagram, you boleh nampak type of relationship between the two variables. You can see whether the relationship is a linear relationship, a non-linear, or there is no linear relationship at all. And number two, we can see or identify the direction of the relationship. So, the direction of the relationship can either be a positive relationship or it can be a negative relationship. A positive relationship means that both variables increase and decrease at the same time. If x increase, y tends to increase. Or if x decrease, y tend to decrease. This is a positive relationship. On the other hand, a negative relationship is as one variable increase, the other variable will decrease or vice versa. As x increase, y tend to decrease. Or as x decrease, y tends to increase. Dia terbalik. This one is a negative relationship. So from a scatter plot, you can identify two things, type and the direction of the relationship. These are a few examples of a scatter diagram. And from this example also, we can differentiate between a few types of relationship. So in the first diagram here, we can see that as x increases, y tends to increase. So this one is an example of a positive linear relationship. In B, we can see that as x increases, y tends to decrease. As x increases, y tends to decrease. So this is an example of a negative linear relationship. C, we can see that there is a pattern between these two variables, but it is not linear. So this is a non-linear relationship, and we are not going to discuss about this in this video. And last but not least is diagram D, where we can see that there is no obvious pattern between x and y. Thus, we can conclude that there is no relationship between x and y. Okay, a few more examples. In this first scatter diagram, I plotted the relationship between hours of revision and statistics GPA. So logically, your GPA depends on hours of revision. Statistics GPA depends on. So this one is dependent variable. And hours of revision will be my independent variable. So from here, we can see that when your hours of revision is approximately 4 hours, estimated GPA is approximately 2. Okay, as the number of hours increase, we can see that the statistics GPA tends to increase. we can see a slight increase in the pattern. So what we can conclude from the diagram is that there exists a positive linear relationship between hours of revision and statistics GPA. Okay, an increase in the hour spent doing revision also increase the statistics GPA. In the next diagram, I've plotted the relationship between price per kilogram and demand for prawns. And as you can see here, there is a pattern where as X increases the price, the demand decreases. So there exists a negative linear relationship between price per kilogram and the demand for prawns. So we can determine the relationship between the two variables from a scatter diagram. But what if you want to determine the relationship and also the strength of the relationship? So we need to use correlation analysis. Correlation analysis is a statistical method used to measure the strength of a relationship between the two variables. So in order to measure whether the two variables related to one another or not, or to determine the strength of the relationship between them, we need to determine the correlation coefficient. So one method to measure the strength of a relationship is by using Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. And the notation is R, where the magnitude is -1 to +1. So R shouldn't be less than -1 and it shouldn't be more than +1. The magnitude of R describes the strength of the relationship, and the symbol positive or negative describe the direction of the relationship. So positive R means positive relationship, means that as X increases, Y tends to increase, or XX decrease, Y tends to decrease. And a negative R indicate a negative relationship, where as one variable increase, the other one will decrease. So the mathematical formula for Pearson correlation coefficient is given, where you should know that your R is the correlation coefficient, where this one shouldn't be less than 1, shouldn't be more than +1. N is the number of paired observation. X is your independent variable and Y is your dependent variable. So the value of R range from -1 to +1. So this describe the magnitude ataupun the strength of the relationship. If you have R +1, it indicates that there is a perfect positive linear correlation or linear relationship between X and Y. Positive indicates the direction and 1 indicates the magnitude, where 1 here represents a perfect correlation. If you have R between +0.75 to less than 1, it still indicates a positive relationship, but it's not perfect, still a very strong positive linear correlation. If it is between 0.5 to 0.75, fairly strong or moderately strong positive, and if it is below 0.5, it indicates a very weak positive linear correlation. If you have R equal to 0, means that there is no linear correlation between X and Y. So the interpretation is still sama untuk yang R equivalent to -1 or -0.5 to less than -1. Cuma bezanya, the difference is if positive tadi positive correlation, now it is negative, dia jadi negative relationship. Magnitude 1 indicate perfect, 0 to 75 sampailah 0.75 sampai less than -1 indicates a very strong relationship, and so on. So in your interpretation, please make sure that you state what is the strength of the relationship, the direction of the relationship, and between what variable.